Here today. I see Mr. Murphy's people once again should I smile? Which side do you like? They like
wherever you like.
Photograph me and they like to hear my voice. We've had 9 such forums and Mr. Murphy's shown up for 1. Apparently he doesn't like to have his voice recorded. Before I start, may I ask a favor? If any of you ever served in the military, your spouse ever served in the military, could you stand up for just a second? Could we show our appreciation? I do that, and you'll see in a moment why I do that, but I really do that because the reason we're able to have forums such as these with Patrick Murphy and myself is because of the sacrifices you and so many that have worn our uniform have made. And the best way to reward that sacrifice, to understand that sacrifice, because I know we all go up to every soldier we see and we say thank you for the sacrifice, is on November the 4th or before, go to the polls and cast your vote, whether it be for Mr. Murphy or myself. We have a democracy that only works if the people participate. I know you see my ads. Let me give you a few minutes commercial on my background because some of you haven't seen my background. My dad served for 27 years in the United States Marine Corps and in 1958 retired to Orlando, Florida, where I went to high school. I then went to the Florida State University and received a bachelor's degree in accounting. I then started a 20-year military career, 3 years of reserve duty, including a year in Vietnam, and then 17 years in the Navy Reserves, and retired as a commander in 1989. After release from active duty, I went to Harvard Business School and I earned an MBA from Harvard. I then worked 15 years in Philadelphia for a money management firm, that's what my profession is, called the Delaware Group. And we were lucky enough to build that from about a $500 million under management company to almost $20 billion when I left. And I was the chief investment officer. In 1987, I just wanted to return home. And so I came back to West Palm and I started a little firm. I raised some capital. And I started a firm. We had 4 employees. We had about $10 million under management. 13 years later, I sold that business to the Northern Trust. We had 52 employees and $2.5 billion under management in those 13 years. Mostly institutional, but some for just ordinary individuals. And I say this not only because it shows I have experience in leadership in business and building businesses. I'm well acquainted with the issues we face today in capital markets with record levels of debt, an economy that's been as poor as any economy we've seen. In 2000, well, I'll go in chronological order. I met Sharon Domino, my wife, and we were married in 1990s.
Be careful.
I have a tattoo. It was June 28th, and then we were blessed. We were very much blessed. At the time, Sharon was 44, going on 45, and I was 59, and we had 14-year-old twins. So I'm the proud father of Mason Domino, who's a great, great kid. Everyone would like him. He's the politician in my family. About this big, he's getting bigger than me, and he loves to play tennis, and he's doing well at school. And then my daughter, who's more of a little bit of a prima donna because she's a sort of a ballet dancer, you know, and I would tell you there's no lady that works harder at what she does. She spends from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon at school. Then she gets a bite. Sharon brings her to ballet, and they usually go from about 4:35. Now they're doing 2 shows, Giselle and the Nutcracker. They go to about 9 o'clock, and they do the same thing on Saturday and Sunday. She's not quite the academic type, but she will work very hard and get good grades. So that's sort of the highlight of my life, those 2 kids. But that's also why I'm running for Congress. It's not for me. I'm too old to benefit a whole lot from being in Congress. But we are on the wrong path, and I want that path secured for my kids of the traditional American dream. In 2002, I was elected to the state legislature. I have served 8 years in the state legislature. Let me talk about a couple of things we did and one thing we failed on. First of all, we were very aggressive working with both parties and across the aisle in getting money for the Loxahatchee River and the Lake Worth Lagoon, which adjoin my representative district down in Jupiter. I live in Jupiter, Florida. We also got the state money for the CERT, the Everglades Restoration Program. The feds have never given us what we wanted. And if you go down to West Palm and have dinner at that tall building, Phillips Point, you look at that beautiful water, it wasn't that beautiful 12 or 13 years ago, but we did achieve that. Secondly, I was lucky enough to be representing District 83 when Jeb Bush had discussions with Scripps Research Institute. I ran my campaign by saying this: the Florida economy has three good legs in the stool: agriculture, real estate development, and tourism. They're fine, but those are low-paid jobs and they're very cyclical. We need something better. We need something better so that when our children grow up, they stay in Florida rather than go up north like I had to do to pursue my thing. And luckily, the people in California were looking for another home. There's a lot of philanthropy in Palm Beach. They were interested in that. So Joe Negron and Jeff Atwater and I were literally on the first planes out to La Jolla, California. We met with the people. I was so excited. They had this great big dinner, and the next day they were going on tours. I was so revved up that I actually said, I'm not going to dinner, I'm going to catch a red eye and speak to the Palm Beach County Commission as to why we need Scripps. And now, if you take the whole Treasure Coast, there's roughly 1,000 jobs, paying on the average over $70,000 a year, that started with Scripps. And while it's frustrating, it's 10 years ago, it takes longer than you think. I have been a professional investor. When you do life sciences and medical products and medical things, it just takes longer. But it gets better and better. And Greg, I don't know if you are aware of this, because I thought what you said, but actually Scripps does confer PhDs, which I found to my surprise at some time.
Not many,
I doubt if there are very many. And you know the problem about a local PhD, then they don't work at the local area. That's sort of the risk. They have to go somewhere else. The third thing I like to talk about, I don't know if any of you ever heard something called portability. Well, a lot of you own houses, and you remember the good old days when the house prices went up instead of down? And because of something called Save Our Homes that the citizens had put into the Constitution in the early 90s, many people found that their house had appreciated, but they now want to live somewhere else. Their children left, they wanted to downsize, or they were a fireman, they wanted to move. But they found out just to buy an equivalent house or to spend a little more, their taxes would go up 2 or 3 times. So we developed something that had to go in the Constitution called portability. And we said if you have a benefit that you've earned in House A, and you are homesteaded, and you go to House B and you are homesteaded, you can take that benefit with you. It's called portability. And I was talking to Ken Pruitt not a few weeks ago, and I talked to many realtors, and they all agree that without portability, the housing market would not be as robust as it is now. Now let me tell you about my big failure. You know, you've read about this, but you don't remember it was made. The state allocated $20 million to a guy that I knew, and I knew him to be a flute flam artist. His name was John Texter. And they allocated for something called digital domain. I am not a person that just says things, you know, because they're popular. I do my homework. And I spent literally hours researching digital domain. I went up to what is called OTED, which is an office in the governor's office. I went through all the paperwork. And everything I thought turned out to be true. This is a company he and some of his partners had bought several years early. It never made a profit. Except the company he was getting the money for wasn't that digital domain. It was a pure startup shell. And I don't believe in government financing startup shells. Meanwhile, he had run 2 businesses, one into bankruptcy, one he had to close down. He had been sued by his former president for illegal firing. In California, you can have wrongful termination. And he lost that suit for $3 million. And I think when we looked at it at the time, we had 37 letters we sent to the governor, Governor Chris, and many others saying, let's look at this closely. Let someone that understands numbers, understands the business he would get into. The business he would get into was, he's going to make movies and do games. Those are great businesses. But Steve Jobs of Apple almost went broke with Pixar before he sold it to Disney, because those are expensive, expensive things. What I didn't know, of course, is he's going to take that money that the state gave him and shift it to his California company so he could just stay alive. So that's a battle I fought, and that's a battle I lost. But I bring that up for three reasons. One is, obviously, some of you are paying for that mistake the state made. But two, there's a lot of talk about being independent reaching across the aisle. I was willing, against the Republican governor, to say this was wrong, this was not the right thing to do. And thirdly, I did my homework. I looked before I made a decision. And in this race, we have something called All Aboard Florida. And my opponent, last year this time, wrote a letter. He wrote a letter to the Federal Department of Transportation. And he said, All Aboard Florida is the future of public transportation projects in America. He literally asked the FDOT to expedite the project. Now, all the 6 Republicans and primaries came in against it. We did a mailer against it. And finally, Mr. Murphy decided he was opposed to it. According to the press, the first time was that he would actually put it in print that he was opposed with July of this year. That doesn't really matter. What does matter is for very, very, very months, he was for that project. If that project happens, Mr. Murphy should take credit, because he did tell the Department of Transportation to expedite that project. And now he has told the local press, well, I've learned additional facts, and therefore I now oppose it. Well, there's two problems with that argument.
You know, excuse me, but I object. I think you should...
No, I'm in a forum. There's 2 candidates, and I'm running against one.
There's no opposing argument.
Let him finish.
Sit down. Sit down. Yeah, but there's no opposing.
I have every right to speak about my opponent. He had every right to be here. And he can answer these questions. But not
He's in Washington. He is just...
No, he's not in Washington. Is he in Washington? Is Mr. Murphy in Washington today? Of course he's not in Washington. Don't kid yourself. He wasn't in Washington those other 8 times. But let me go back to what, this is a campaign. He had every right to be here, and I have every right to make my points. You can ask me questions. So he said to the press, he said, well, new facts came to light. So we've asked him at every forum, we'd asked him today, Patrick, what new facts? Are we interfering with transportation? Same in October. How much time have I taken? I have taken my time. I thank you, and I hope you'll have some questions from this young lady and others that are concerned about All Aboard Florida, as I was.
Thank you.
Answer pretty briefly. First of all, I apologize to the person that asked the question. I usually mention in my speech that I started a business and created over 50 jobs locally, and I usually mention in my speech that I helped bring Scripps, which has created over 1,000 high-paying jobs locally, but apparently I forgot to do that this time. The job dilemma is national. We have unemployment, the U6 rate, the real rate, discouraged and unemployed over 12%. We brag when we create 200,000 jobs. In the Reagan years, it was 400 and 500. And those 200,000 jobs are low pay and a minimum pay. And there's 4 things that we specifically put on our website we need to address that would help create jobs in America, and then hopefully it would flow down to District 18. 1, we need to improve the Keystone Pipeline. It would immediately create 42,000 jobs. I know none here, but the spin-offs and such, there might be supplies that are ordered from here. More importantly, it will lower the cost of energy, which both is economically good for our citizens, but it also would make us less reliable on our enemies in the Mideast. Second, our corporations are taxed both here and abroad when they earn money. And you may have read in recent years, and the rate here is 35%, whether it's, you may, if you listen to the business news, there's something called inversions going on. And one of the inversions is a company in America merges with a company in Ireland or somewhere else. And then they move their headquarters over there. There's literally $2 trillion overseas that if we did not double tax could be brought. Third, we need to relook at regulation. I don't know if there's any bankers in this thing, but I was with the chamber this morning with a bunch of bankers. One of them told me, for every banker we hire, we have to hire 2 compliance people. They don't know what the rules are, people can't get loans. And fourthly, we need to re-look at Obamacare. I talked to people that own franchises at McDonald's and Five Guys and others. They're hiring, but they hire at 28 hours a week, not 40 hours a week. The government itself has says Obamacare will cost this economy 2.5 million jobs. So those are the areas I will work on in order to create jobs both nationally and in the local economy.
Thank you.
Mr. Orbach, if you possibly will allow me that. Mr. Domino, you gave us much information about your work in Florida. However, you are now running for a national office. You did not mention any of your views on the major issues facing our country, such as amnesty, such as your feelings on abortion, such as your alliance with the right wing or the left wing, and I think that's more important to us right now than what you have to say about Florida. Could you please?
You know, and you're absolutely right, and I was amazed at how fast my 10 minutes went, but when you're being interrupted from the audience, sometimes you get off the track. Because Barack Obama did say the other day that my name's not on the ballot, but my policies are. And with the major issues, I'm willing to talk about any of them. The 3 you mentioned were amnesty. Unlike my opponent, who believes in a pathway to citizenship and who believes in the Dream Act, I am against illegal giving amnesty to illegal immigrants. We need to, 1, close the borders as best we can, and there was a Republican bill a few weeks ago that Mr. Murphy voted against to go along that. Secondly, we need to enforce the law. And thirdly, we need to hold employers accountable, because half of the illegals come in legally and just stay. The second issue, I don't really like to talk too much, but here's my position on abortion. I am personally opposed to abortion. But I will take an oath of office I had before to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And the Supreme Court has ruled that under certain circumstances, abortions cannot be interfered with, and that's how I voted in the legislature. But I do have one, and I know Mr. Murphy on his site says he's pro-choice. I don't want to argue that issue, but there is one area that I really do disagree with him. For or against abortion, he's voted to allow for taxpayers-funded abortions, and I would not vote to allow taxpayers-funded abortion. What was the third item?
Third was, do you classify yourself as a right-wing, centrist, or liberal?
Well, you know, every paper that writes me up says I'm sort of a middle guy, you know? I mean, there's issues, some of it's emphasis. When you're in the state legislature, for example, everybody's right-wing, most of the time everybody agrees on things. I mean, we're all working for the same objectives. But on fiscal matters, I'm very conservative. I'm very, very concerned about the $18 trillion of debt and those kinds of issues. On social matters, I'm probably more, you know, a centrist, but I'm certainly, I mean, for example, I did not get the endorsement of my friend Alan West, and I say my friend in parentheses, because I'm just not, we get elected to run a government, not to close a government down. The government does many, many things. My two sort of overarching issues, one is national defense. I believe the reason why we have our government is national defense. And then adhering to the Constitution. We have the Bill of Rights, and one important part of the Constitution is separation of power. So I don't like the labels, but I guess I would say a little left of center, more, I mean a little right of center, more on the conservative side. Was there a fourth issue you wanted? Okay, thank you.
And Dorothy, if I may, for Mr. Orbach. Orbach, sorry.
That are not taught in our schools.
Really, you know, I come from Palm Beach County, which is really a barbell. We have some of the very poor schools, but of the top 100 high schools in America, we have 3 at the top because of the choice programs. Yeah, Suncoast, Atlantic, and Drivers. I guess from the national level, my comment would be this, that there's proposals that much of what the local school board should do or will do in terms of their book formularies and everything should come from Washington. I disagree with that. I do believe in we do need some testing, we need standards. If you don't do that, how do you know your kids are doing well? You know, the biggest category of increase in education is homeschooling, which once again tells you. My understanding is that Palm Beach and Martin have been a little bit more successful. I've never been on the school board. It might be your school board member should spend some time down and just see if there's examples they can follow. But I really don't want to talk about the very local, just on the national thing. Our kids have got to be able to compete in a global world, and if they're not well educated, they can't.
It is, we're going to take just 2 more questions. Yes.
Finally, I want to hear about the trains.
I do have a question for all the candidates.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Diane.
Okay, first of all, Mr. Domino, you talked about vetting digital domain, all right? Did you also send that information to the city manager? Do you know who the city manager was at that time? I mean, it was just as important to send it to the governor as it was to send it to the city. Did the city know about it?
Well, I don't know if the city know about it. Let me tell you what I did do, though. I was a state representative. You generally do the work in your district. This was a state issue, I did much. But who was your director of your business development board at the time? Mr. Pelton? Larry Pelton. He had been a guy sort of respected down in Palm Beach when he was there. And I went to an event and someone said, Larry Pelton says, you're grandstanding, you're politically grandstanding on digital bank. I can remember this well because there was a business meeting in Orlando. And I couldn't start my car, so I had to get a jump. So I had to drive from Orlando to the car dealer in West Palm. So I tell you this because for about an hour and a half, I spoke with Mr. Pelton. And I went over item after item after item after item. So I don't know what he communicated to the local officials, but in the district I represented, West Palm, because they were also going to do something for digital, I asked for and received a hearing with the elected officials and voiced my opinion. So I would assume that Mr. Pelton would have shared that. Also, a couple of people saw it in the paper, and I always offered to come down. But as a state representative, I didn't feel it was my job to go up at the local level. But I think my views and my vetting were well publicized, And what, do you have a second question here, or do you have it?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'd like to know about your feelings on entitlements. I mean, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that is something that is important to us. And what I hear is that most Republicans right now are talking about making cuts rather than the money that our taxes, instead of going here in the United States, are being sent to other countries. And whatever we get is considered an entitlement. So,
well, I differ a little bit. I don't view Medicare or Social Security as entitlement. I view it as a trust-funded money that's been taken out of your, paychecks, and then is useful for you. I am maybe a little biased because I am on both Social Security, well, not on Medicare because being military, I'm on TRICARE. We have enormous problems in those. Medicaid is something different. Medicaid comes out of general revenues and is a state match and a federal match. What are the two big ones you talk about, Medicare and Social Security? I think there's a lot of understanding that in 10 or 12 or 15 years, we may have trouble meeting the obligations if for no other. When Social Security was started in Germany or the Prussian Empire, the retirement age was 62, but people lived to 45. Now we have more people demanding. And the way the numbers work is very simple. Like, the earlier you resolve the problem, the better. And there are things that I won't do and things I will do. But I don't mention specifics only because just like when you're negotiating a labor contract, you maybe give here and there. But the one thing I think we should do is when your paycheck, they take $5 out, that money literally should go in a trust fund, not be spent for other general revenues things. And then, and I'm unbiased here, I think those trust funds, just like every state and every big company in America does, should have professional money managers managing that money. Because what they do now is they give it to the federal government, get an IOU, I don't know, 2%. Most people can earn more than 2%. But the earlier you look at the problem, the less dramatic changes you have. But to me, Medicare and Social Security are contract that we entered into when we were younger. Maybe, you know, I'm a little older than you, and I expected that to be there, and I will work hard to make sure it is there for our citizens. Did you have a third question, or is that?
No, the mayors.
Oh, great.
Or candidates.
Thank everyone for taking time out of their schedule to listen to this item. I want to just make comments about two areas. Mr. Murphy's friends are calling every night saying that Carl Domino voted for Sunrail, therefore he must be for all aboard Florida. Have any of you, Sunrail, let me explain, is this, because I did vote for it. It's a rapid transit project in Orlando, Florida. It's up and running. Have any of you ever been to New York City or Chicago or Philadelphia? Yeah. Now, if we had no subways in New York City or Chicago or Philly, how many cars would be on the road? So I'm not intuitively against or intellectually against rapid transit, but that was a state project. This is a private project that's going to be funded with your dollars. Now, the good news is last week they started getting around, they're going to go to the capital markets. I think if they do that, they'll have trouble. Once again, for the record, Mr. Murphy supported it for many, many, many months. Now he's joining me in opposing it. We didn't talk, and I understand because we have mayors, and I'd like to finish up with some talk about national defense issues. I think that's very important, national security. And I would say we're perhaps in the worst posture in terms of national security that we've been in my lifetime. Our friends no longer trust us. Our enemies no longer fear us. Every day you see that in the headlines. We drew a red line in the sand in Syria if they used chemical weapons. But then we backed away. Putin actually bailed us out on that one. But a few months later, Putin decided he wanted to take over part of the Ukraine and Crimea. And guess what? We did sanctions, but he now has Crimea and is perhaps. Mr. Murphy went to Afghanistan a few months, and according to what he said to the press, he was impressed with the stability over there. I don't know if you read the New York Times. Read the New York Times today as the Taliban is getting more and more involved in that area. In the Mideast, I had a chance to spend some time with Ron Dorman, who's the ambassador to Israel. We really talked about a lot of things. And I was so discouraged by our administration. You know, there was this little situation a few weeks ago where Hamas was raining the state of Israel with bombs, day after day, rockets. And we were chiding our friends in Israel for taking response to that. That makes no sense to me. And what also makes no sense to me is this. There is a rumor, right? It's only a rumor, but it's on the press, that almost no matter what they come up with on the Iran nuclear program, Barack Obama will buy off on that program. And since he's become president, it will not be something friendly to the state of Israel, I guarantee you. Netanyahu will not accept it.
If it's a rumor, why are you bringing it up?
Because it's reported. It's reported.
I haven't read it anyplace.
Oh, you don't think it's true? Okay.
It's propaganda by
Let's not have any cross conversation.
I think there's members of the audience should come up here and speak for Mr. Murphy. I didn't say it was Mr. Murphy doing it. I said it was President Obama. And it's out there. And if you don't believe it's out there, it's just like the rumor. He's going to let many, many illegal immigrants be given amnesty after the election, and that's a rumor. But guess what? Wait and see. At the end of the day, this is a clear-cut election. I am a Republican, and he is a Democrat. He was a Republican up to 2 or 3 years ago. Ask him why he changed parties. He says he's independent, but you know, in this state you can register as an independent. Many people are. He chose to register as a Democrat, and as such, he voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and he enables the policies of Barack Obama, which have led to one of the lowest economic recoveries we've had and one of the most dangerous national security postures we've ever been in. Thank you very much for your attention.